Tonight's speaker, Dr. Justin Bass, has a PhD from Dallas Theological Seminary in New Testament Studies. His recent book is entitled The Battle for the Keys, Revelation 1, verse 18, and Christ's Descent into the Underworld. He's received a Master's of Theology from DTS and a business degree in entrepreneurship from Southern Methodist University. Dr. Bass is currently the lead pastor of 1042 Church in Frisco and a professor at Dallas Christian College and Dallas Theological Seminary. When he's not working, he is reading, watching movies, usually Lord of the Rings, or Fight Club, and spending time with his high school sweetheart, Allison Bass, who's here tonight. Thank you, Allison. And their two kids, Ariana and Christian. He is also the vice president of the Bible and Beer Consortium. Please welcome one of my heroes of the faith, presenting In Tyler We Trust, Fight Club, and the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Dr. Justin Bass.
Thanks, Ezra. Yeah, right. Tell my wife that. Well, I am really excited about this. This is such a great night, though. I got to say, man, look, this weather's awesome. Can't ask for a better night. But I'm really excited about this talk because all my research for this movie and just the different things I'm going to talk about, I didn't find anyone except me. I'm the only maniac who ever compared this movie to the gospel of Jesus, okay? So that means that you have no idea what I'm going to say. This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented, uncharted territory. So that's fun for me. That's fun for me. The Supreme Court recently, this past week, if you've been keeping up with the news, they struck down a speech code at George Mason University that actually wanted to ban speech that was found to be communicating, this is quote, communicating in a manner that may cause emotional or physical discomfort. I want you to know, let me give you a trigger warning for tonight. I plan to communicate in a manner that will cause both emotional and physical discomfort tonight, especially for men. And I hope as a result of such discomfort, you might have what the Fight Club says, a near-life experience. If you recently or ever have been enraged about a Starbucks order, you need to hear this talk. If you've ever told the person working at Starbucks how many ice cubes to put in your drink, you need to hear this talk. If you can't stop looking at your iPhone, if you're looking at your iPhone right now, you need to hear this talk. If you're a guy and you take selfies by yourself, you need to hear this talk. And if you're experiencing serious discontentment with your job or with your life, or even if you are somewhat content with your life or your job, you need to hear this talk. You need to hear this because this is your life and it's ending 1 minute at a time. I'm wedding my two great loves here in this message. This is the first time we've done this in the BBC, and this is the first time I've ever given a talk like this. I always quote movies. I'm a big movie buff, but this is the first time I've ever wed my two great loves, movies and the gospel of Jesus Christ. I won't tell you which one I love more. Hopefully, people who know me can tell you which one I love more, but maybe they won't be able to. But first, let me give you a biblical justification for what I'm doing here, so you don't cry blasphemy. When Paul stood on the Areopagus with the philosophers of Athens to proclaim Jesus Christ and Him crucified, he only quoted from one source, and it wasn't the Bible. It wasn't the Bible. This is what he said. For in Him we live and move and exist, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are His offspring. Now, Paul is not quoting the Bible. He's quoting a Greek poet named Aratus from the 4th century BC. And I want to give you the full quote. This is the full quote that Paul is quoting here. It says this, "Let us begin with Zeus. Never, O men, let us leave him unmentioned. All the ways are full of Zeus, and all the marketplaces of human beings. The sea is full of him, so are the harbors. In every way we have all to do with Zeus, for we are his offspring." That's the quote. The his is Zeus in the original context. Now, to be clear, Paul is not saying Zeus is God. That's not what Paul's saying. If you read Paul's letters, it's very clear he doesn't believe Zeus exists. In fact, he believes demons are behind such idols. Rather, he's taking a true statement that originally applied to Zeus in the original context, but showing that it's true of the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And he's basically baptizing it. And so many Christians throughout the last 2,000 years have done this with the culture, with pagan culture, with philosophy, with so many other things. St. Augustine has probably the most succinct line on this. He said, "Every good and true Christian should understand that wherever he may find truth, it is his Lord's." So you find truth in music, in secular music, in movies, in Greek philosophy, wherever you find truth in other religions, it is ours. It is our Lord's. And I think since the philosophy of movies dominate our culture, in the same way that Greek poetry and philosophy dominated ancient Athens, I could see Paul speaking today and saying, just as Tyler said in Fight Club. And he could probably do that with many other movies as well. But let me be clear, Fight Club is not a Christian film. And Tyler Durden is not a moral human being. In fact, if people are used to watching Facing the Giants or God's Not Dead, if you watch Fight Club, you might have a heart attack. But this poem by Aratus was not a Christian poem. And Zeus is not a moral god. In fact, he raped other goddesses. He's a very immoral god. But similar to how Paul brought out this eternal truth from this pagan document and compared Zeus to God, so I'm going to seek to bring out some great truths from this movie Fight Club and compare Tyler and his mission with Jesus and his mission. In the book Fight Club, if you haven't read it, the movie's actually better. This is one place where the movie is better than the book. But this is what it's based on, a book by Chuck Palahniuk. The Christian parallels are actually pretty explicit in the book, more so in the movie, even though they are in the movie. Let me give you some examples. Tyler's story right away, if you begin the book, is paralleled to the Gospels of Jesus. So you get this impression that we're getting the Gospel of Tyler in this book. The very first fight between Tyler and the narrator, who is Edward Norton in the movie, occurs on a Sunday night. In fact, Fight Club from then on meets Sunday morning between the hours of 2 a.m. and 7 a.m. And during the first Fight Club, at that Sunday morning, the voiceover says this: "The hysterical shouting was in tongues, like a Pentecostal church. When the fight was over, nothing was solved, but nothing mattered. We all felt saved." If Fight Clubs are Tyler's places of worship, then Project Mayhem is the training and mission of Tyler to save the world, to free the world from this materialistic system. In fact, there are fascinating parallels between Tyler's training process in Project Mayhem to ancient Christian monasteries. The rule of St. Benedict, which is actually the most ancient rule for monasteries, still used today in Catholic monasteries, actually the parallels between what Tyler requires of his initiates is almost identical. It's almost like he's reading, Chuck at least, or Fincher, probably Chuck, is getting it from the rule of St. Benedict. Just like the early disciples of Jesus, they sold all they had. They only had bare possessions. They gave up their family. They gave up friends and completely submitted to Tyler and his mission. They said, "In Tyler we trusted." That's where I got the title. It comes from the movie. In the same way that Jesus' early disciples and Christians all throughout church history have done the same and given that radical submission to Jesus Christ. I could have done this with many films. There's quite a few films that I think I could show the beauty and the beauty of the gospel and show how it ultimately finds its fulfillment in the gospel of Jesus. But I chose Fight Club because it really may very well be my favorite movie of all time. And that's a strange thing. It really is, and I admit it. It's very strange. But for some reason, and it's very weird, but for some reason when I watch Fight Club, and I don't watch it a lot, but when I've watched it, I'm inspired to follow Christ. I'm inspired to make disciples of all nations. I'm inspired to live for Him and to die for Christ more than any other movie, except maybe The Passion of the Christ, because that's just the gospel straight on screen. So Passion of the Christ does probably inspire me more. But other than that, Fight Club inspires me more than any other. Probably my favorite line in the movie is when Tyler says, "I don't want to die without any scars." I don't want to die without any scars. You get scars for many reasons, and many of them are good for your soul. You get scars from going to war. You get scars from police work, being a fireman. You get scars from cancer. Many of y'all, maybe some of y'all go to the Village Church. Matt Chandler, he's got a big scar on the back of his head because they pulled a tumor out of his head. And he talks about the blessing of God from that. You can listen to his testimony. Fighting against injustice. You think about Martin Luther King Jr. and his marches against a racist South and all the scars he got as a result. But of course, persecution as a result of following and proclaiming Christ, you receive scars. I really don't want to die without any scars. Paul said, I bear on my back the scars of Jesus. I bear on my back, it's literally in the Greek, the stigmata of Jesus, the scars of Christ. It shows that he owns me, these beatings I've received for proclaiming his name. In fact, Achilles, which Brad Pitt actually played, by the way, in Troy, he said that all his myrmidons have bled for him. Every single one of them had bled for him. And I'm ashamed I've yet to bleed for the one who gave all his blood for me. I agree with Tyler. I don't want to die without any scars, but to baptize it, I don't want to die without any scars for Christ. I'd much rather die of martyrdom under ISIS than high cholesterol in America. Don't tell ISIS that. But I'm not the only one deeply inspired by this film. Soon after its release in 1999, it became a cult classic. In 2008, if you didn't know, Tyler Durden was ranked #1 by Empire Magazine. I don't even know if that magazine still exists, but by Empire Magazine on an online survey, hundreds of thousands participated, the 100 greatest movie characters of all time. Tyler Durden was #1, and he beat out Darth Vader, the Joker, James Bond, Indiana Jones, Han Solo, the Dude, and Michael Corleone. The Dude is from Big Lebowski, if you know that. It's also, by those same polls, ranked #10 of movies of all time. The IMDb's top 250 movies of all time ranks it at #10 right now. And the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about fight. That's ranked as any list of famous quotes of movies, that's ranked at near the top of one of the most famous quotes ever in a movie. Why do so many love Fight Club, especially men? But there are many women who love it too. My wife, in fact, is one of those who loves it. That's why she's such a great wife. We actually saw this movie. I didn't even think about it until I put together this talk, but this movie came out in 1999, and we're high school sweethearts. We went to see this movie in the theater in 1999. See, I'm such a romantic. I took my girlfriend to Fight Club. But I believe the primary message, the reason why people love it is the primary message of this film captures something in the human spirit. That we are designed for something greater than a safe, secure, comfortable American lifestyle. Something greater than shopping at IKEA, drinking lattes, and working our entire lives to big corporations and franchises. That we, especially men, are called to fight. We're called to go to war. We want to live for something. We want to die for something. Why are thousands upon thousands of young European men, and even women too, and some from America, fleeing their comfortable, safe lifestyles to go to Iraq and Syria to fight for ISIS? If you've done the studies on this, thousands upon thousands are going and fleeing their life. Sometimes even they have families, they have kids. Why are they doing that? I think this movie answers that question a bit. Tyler says it this way: you have a class of young, strong men and women, and they want to give their lives for something. Advertising has these people chasing cars and clothes they don't need. Generations have been working in jobs they hate so they can buy stuff they don't really need. I think this movie is kind of a King Arthurian call back to chivalry for the 21st century male. When it was released in 1999, men who were born after 1965, which includes me, unless they had fought in the Gulf War of Iraq, had not seen or experienced war their entire lives. Instead, their lives were filled with cubicles, with television, with video games, and with lattes. Most American males became spectators, not participants. They became a generation of spectators. Tyler goes on to say, we are the middle children of history, no purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war. Our great depression is our lives. This has changed somewhat since 9/11, which happened 2 years after the release of Fight Club. And interestingly, if you watch the movie Fight Club, Tyler actually refers to the place where the buildings fall down as ground zero, which is kind of an interesting thing. But we've seen many wars in our lifetime since 9/11, but there's still, within America, a dominant majority of American males that are spectators and not participants. The movie says they are emasculated, discontent, restless hearts, wandering for their true purpose. David Fincher, the director of the movie, says it this way in one of the commentaries on the movie. He says, "We're designed to be hunters, and we're in a society of shopping. There's nothing to kill anymore. There's nothing to fight, nothing to overcome, nothing to explore. In this societal emasculation, this everyman, the narrator, is created." And this cultural emasculation has created what has become famously known as the man-child, or some have called the Peter Pan syndrome. And before I go on bashing the man-child, let me tell you, I have a tendency towards the man-child. We all, by our sinful nature, have a tendency towards the man-child. So this is for all of us. Many of our young men in America just don't want to grow up. In fact, the main character in this film, the one played by Edward Norton, he is the everyman man-child. He attends, at the beginning of the movie, a group that meets for testicular cancer. And this is a metaphor for the fact that he has been emasculated, even as the people around him have literally been emasculated. The man-child is a very sad phenomenon, which you can see mirrored in many of the comedies that have come out in the last 20 years. They should really be tragedies, though, a lot of these comedies. The movie Step Brothers is a classic example of what I'm talking about. It's about two guys in their 30s that live with their parents. They can't keep a job. They can't keep a job. They have no real purpose in life beyond their infantile pleasures. They are man-children. And it may be funny in the film, but people in America who actually have to house and take care of man-children, it's not that funny. It's not that funny. In fact, in the ancient world, or in the Middle Ages, man-children would have been beheaded, and rightly so. We see it in Old School, another movie that captures this. Old School, a group of guys in their early 30s, discontent with life. They don't want to grow up, so they want to recreate their experience of partying in college. Now, the one dose of reality that this movie gives, which I appreciate that they did this, was the wife of the Will Ferrell character divorces him. She ends up divorcing him because he can't get out of his 20s. And in my research, it was fascinating. I went and looked at all these articles by women's magazines. And many of them had titles like 13 ways to tell if your man's a man-child. 10 ways to tell if he's a boy, if your husband won't grow up, things like that. And the consistent thing that I kept finding, you can find a man-child described in these ways. Someone who spends more time on video games, porn, TV, sports, and social media over jobs, responsibility, commitment, self-control, loving and serving their wives, and raising their children. Now, many of those former things I said are actually, other than porn, they're not bad things, but if you do those things to the neglect of the most important things, you're a man-child. And I've counseled many couples seeking to save their marriage from divorce, and I can tell you that I've seen this firsthand, that this is an epidemic. I think 10 years down the road, we're going to see that many of the divorces are because of this very reason. Now, let me say, women have their issues too, but this movie is really a response, a challenge to this epidemic among the 21st century male. In fact, the magazine Maxim was created in, guess when? 1996. They actually saw the writing on the wall. They could see the rise of the man-child. So they created something for the man-child. And in fact, an article on this says this: Maxim asked the single young male what he wanted, and they learned he didn't want to grow up. Whatever else you might say about Playboy or Esquire, they tried to project the image of a cultured fellow. As Hefner famously wrote in an early Playboy, his ideal reader enjoyed inviting a female acquaintance in for a quiet discussion of Picasso, Nietzsche, and jazz. Hearing this, the Maxim dude would want to hurl. He'd like to forget that he ever went to school. Maxim happily obliges. The editors try to keep readers' minds from wandering with articles like Confessions of a Strip Club Bouncer. This is the situation of Edward Norton, the narrator, the everyman. He's in his early 30s. He's discontent. He's been emasculated by this culture. He's stressed out about PowerPoint slide colors, about furnishing his apartment, about what tie he's going to wear. And thus enters Tyler. He has a midlife crisis and thus enters Tyler. Tyler teaches him to reclaim his masculinity, to be free from the enslavement of a materialistic society, and ultimately to give his life for something greater than himself. And honestly, it's the method of Tyler that I find so inspiring and so parallel to the method of Jesus in the way he called us to make disciples of all nations. Because if you look at the early church specifically within the Roman Empire, what happened? As the gospel spread, people from all different walks of life started giving their allegiance not to Caesar, but to Christ. And that's exactly what you see in Fight Club. People, policemen, people that are in the military, people that are washing dishes, people of all different walks of life in the movie Fight Club are no longer giving their allegiance to the American government, they're giving their allegiance to Tyler. And that's why when Tyler calls them to do what he wants them to do, in the end, they do it. And it's the same thing with Jesus with the early church, and that's why the Roman Empire turned upside down within 300 years of Christ's death. But let me just give you some life lessons from Fight Club and Tyler that I believe find their ultimate fulfillment in the gospel of Jesus Christ. First, you need to have a near-life experience. You need to have a near-life experience. Tyler uses this great phrase when he convinces the narrator, Edward Norton, when they're driving to let go from the steering wheel and just let the car crash. No longer fear death. Let the car crash. Just let go. But it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for letting go of the things that you can't control. But he says, Tyler says in this, while they're in the car, he basically asked the people in the car, he says, if you were to die right now, what would you wish you had done? What would you wish you had done? And one guy says, I wish I had painted a self-portrait. The other guy says, I wish I had built a house. But that's a great question for all of us. If you had a 10-second delay and you knew death was coming, and you had a 10-second delay, what would you wish you had done? What would you wish you had done? Whatever that is, do it. Whatever that is, that's what you're supposed to do. This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. Have a near-life experience. The second thing, Tyler says, the things you own end up owning you. Do an inventory on your life and your possessions. Do you really need all this stuff in your garage, in your house, in your apartment? Do you really need all that stuff? No, you don't. You actually don't need all that stuff. I know here you do not need all that stuff. All that stuff is not making you happier, by the way. It's probably compounding your stress. Sell your house. Get a smaller house. Sell your car. Get a less expensive car. Get a smaller apartment. Sell all your clothes. Sell your shoes. Sell so much of the stuff that you have and give to someone who actually is in need. Simplify. A great challenge from the movie. Simplify your life. Jesus taught the same thing. He taught his disciples to sell their possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. You cannot serve two masters. You'll be enslaved to the one, and you'll hate the other. The third one is get off your couch and do something with your life. Get off your couch and do something. Stop being a spectator. We're all spectators. We watch the debates, the presidential debates. We watch the Super Bowl. We watch UFC. We watch people go into war in Afghanistan. We watch everything. We don't do anything. We're spectators. We need to be participants. We need to get off our couch and do something. In fact, there was a video posted by a female ISIS jihadi girl, and she basically was calling out all the so-called jihadi men in Europe and America who were spending way too much time on social media and not really doing anything that would make them a jihadi. And she actually says this, get off your couches and do something instead of spending 24/7 on social media. And she says, stop crying out on social media, I want Sharia, I want to make hijrah, yet you are doing nothing about it. You are not a man, you're just a male. And then she goes on, you need to get off your couch and kill some infidels. Now, I don't agree with that ending, but I agree with the first part. They do need to get off the couch. They do need to do something. That something doesn't need to be killing infidels, but that something, there is something for the 21st century American men and women to do, and we need to do it. Tyler says we're consumers. We're byproducts of a lifestyle obsession. Murder, crime, poverty, these things don't concern me. What concerns me are Celebrity Magazine, televisions with 500 channels. And of course, we can add to this. This was in 1999. We can add to this now. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, video games, binge watching an entire season of shows on Netflix, and countless other things that suck away our time and our life. Join the Peace Corps. Just quit your job. Become a missionary. Get a degree in something that's going to help your fellow man. Fight for the unborn. Fight for the sex slaves that are right here in DFW. Fight that another child doesn't have to go home hungry. Be a big brother to so many fatherless young men that are right here locally. Serve your wife. Raise your children. There are so many things this strong American class of men and women can do. But the first thing is you got to get off your couch. Lastly, my favorite scene in the movie is when Tyler gives a near-life experience to a guy named Raymond K. Hessel. Raymond K. Hessel. He works at a convenience store, and Tyler takes him and basically takes him hostage, puts him in the back alley, and puts a gun to the back of his head and tells him he's going to kill him. He then looks through his wallet, and he finds that he used to go to a community college. And he says, Raymond, why did you go to a community college? What were you going to do? Why were you going to community college? What were you going to study? And he ends up saying, what did you want to do with your life? What did you want to be, Raymond K. Hessel? And eventually he answers, a veterinarian. He wanted to help animals. And so Tyler puts the gun away. And then he tells him, if you are not on your way to being a veterinarian in 6 months, then I will come and find you. Then I will come and find you. And as Raymond runs away, Tyler says this, tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of Raymond K. Hessel's life. His breakfast will taste better than any meal you and I have ever tasted. This was, I think, a godlike moment. I love this scene because I felt like it was godlike. Because if you study the scriptures, this is the way God does things. He may not put up a gun to your head, but he may give you cancer. He may put you on a bed of suffering to bring you back to himself. He may break your legs. He may do mighty things to bring you back to his love and for your ultimate fulfillment and purpose in this life. Raymond had a near-life experience. He found purpose. And this is what, to baptize it, God created Raymond to do, and now he's going to fulfill his dreams. I bet you he did become a veterinarian. Don't just have a near-life experience. Find Raymond K. Hessels and give them a near-life experience. Don't put a gun to their head, but encourage them, inspire them, pray for them, help them financially, and many other means. Help them achieve what God has called them to do. Peter and John found a guy that was crippled and said, in the name of Jesus, walk. And he went leaping around the temple in Acts chapter 3. He had a near-life experience, but it doesn't have to be that grand. Tabitha in Acts chapter 9 made clothes for the homeless. She made clothes for the poor. She gave them a near-life experience. And of course, to baptize the near-life experience, we need to have the ultimate life experience, which is giving our life to Jesus Christ and being ready to live and die for his mission, seeing the entire world subject to himself. I think this one call from Jesus, this one line from Jesus summarizes all the great things. There's a lot of bad things, but all the great things from the movie Fight Club. Jesus says, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself. He must let go of the things of the world, be detached of the things of the world, to truly be free in him. He must take up his cross. And by the way, anybody who ever took up a cross got scars. They receive scars. And he must follow me. And there's nothing better you can do with these minutes you have, these minutes that are going away towards your death. There's nothing better you can do with those minutes than follow Jesus. And he says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. It's only when you've lost everything that you're free to do anything in Christ. This is your life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. Find true fulfillment and freedom and strength in our Tyler, the Son of God, who gave his all for you and for me. Thanks.
I'm obviously a big fan of using what? Using the world's example from a Christian perspective. Proverbs says that the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous. So in understanding that, give me
the wealth of the wicked what?
Is stored up for the righteous.
Yeah.
That said, I wouldn't encourage someone that wants to go into filmmaking to study porn for close-ups, that kind of thing.
Definitely.
So my question is, along that line, where would you say you would draw the line to say, I'm not sure that Deadpool has Sunday school applications?
Yeah.
Give me the litmus, because I know where my litmus is in terms of apologetic delving and that kind of thing. But there is a line where you say no.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think Romans 14 gives us a lot of good insight here that basically that there's gray area, especially when we're dealing with culture and we're dealing with movies, music. I mean, I'd say the litmus test I use, Fight Club fails it. So I think Fight Club is something I saw as an unbeliever. So I saw it when I was 1999. I think I was 18 or 19 years old, and I saw it as an unbeliever. And so it's one of those films. It's one of those things from my past that I sought to redeem. But like if Fight Club came out today, I would say probably Christians shouldn't watch it. So I think there's a gray area there, but I do have certain rules, and so like Deadpool, I've said I don't think Christians should see that, but it's kind of hypocritical because I talk about Fight Club. So I think there's things that have to do with things from your past, but certain criteria I would do, like if there's outright sexual immorality, things, viewing things that are truly evil, I think we shouldn't, as Christians, view. I think I separate like gratuitous violence between violence like in war movies like Saving Private Ryan or Schindler's List or Braveheart, movies where the violence is used because of a historical reason, to me is different than movies where it's used just to be funny, like Deadpool or something like that. I think Fight Club has a depth, and that's why I think it's important to explore, because I think it does lead people to these important issues. But there's so much gray area there. That's why I say I admit there's some hypocrisy there, because I'll slap a Christian around for seeing Deadpool, but then I'm doing a talk on Fight Club, so not truly consistent there. So that's okay.
Hi, thanks again for coming. I had a question. I think it's needed for a little clarification, because it seems the whole Planet X whole narrative with Tyler Durden is really works focused, and as Christians, a theology that is as focused as in an imbalanced sense, is focused on the spiritual versus the works, is just as detrimental as just works, because the one thing Jesus repudiates is works righteousness. So how do we, I guess the question is, how do you differentiate following Jesus versus following Tyler Durden, given the importance of works, but not making the works an end in themselves, because we know they can't ultimately.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, at first I'd say just keep in mind I'm seeking to redeem certain elements of the film, so not everything. And so all analogies ultimately break down. But I would say Jesus's commands and the things he says, there is a paradox with it, because in one place, one person says to Jesus in Luke 13, "Will only a few be saved?" And he says, "Strive to enter." And it's actually the Greek word agonize, agonizo. It's strive, agony, go through agony to enter the kingdom. And at the same time, in John chapter 6, he's asked, "What works must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he says, "The work of God is this, to believe on the one whom he has sent." So clearly, it's by faith that you are saved, but there is a faith that saves is a faith that works, like with James. And so I think there is that paradox there. And so I think with Fight Club, the main challenge with the metaphor with Tyler is, what do you do once you're following Christ? What is the calling? And so I think the calling is to make disciples of all nations, to actually live your life, to get off the couch, to do something to serve the Lord. It's not to be saved, but it's doing it because, like, why did Paul do it? Why did Paul go around? Why was he compelled? He was compelled by the love of Christ, by the grace of Christ, to go and do the things he did. So that's how I'm inspired. I don't serve Christ because I think I need to be for my salvation. I serve Christ because out of love for what he's done for me. So, a great question.
Hello, thank you for coming, and thank you for being willing to doing something that maybe stretches others and doing something for the first time yourself. I appreciate the way you started talking about how Paul's message, he was willing to use the language of those who he was speaking to. And so my question is similar to Ezra's, but more on
Can you put the microphone so people can hear you?
Yeah, my question is similar to Ezra's, but instead of the movies and where your line would be, is if I was curious, because I, as a teenager, trained to be a missionary, and when talking and looking at this, the discussion of syncretism came up. So do you have any thoughts about, you mentioned a few times in your talk or throughout that where truth is, that's ours. So do you have any thoughts about a line or any comments about syncretism? Because I've heard a lot about that in the past.
And explore, what do you mean by syncretism? Just
it's where you preach the message in a way that it doesn't sound like Christianity. It sounds more like what they might be practicing. Like,
I see.
Like, say in Islam, for example, you might call God Allah. And some missionaries think that as a Christian, talking to Muslims, you shouldn't do that. So that they would call it syncretism.
Yeah, that's good. I think Christians can fall on different sides of this. I'm definitely of the opinion that I like to baptize things in other religions, things in movies. Like I said, there's a certain line. So if some movies are just unredeemable, and some things in culture and maybe some religions, like maybe Scientology, is unredeemable. I mean, there's really nothing to redeem from that. But Islam, for example, I'm very happy to take the miracles of Jesus that are talked about in the Quran and make that a common ground starting point. Similar to what Paul did with the Greek poets, and he quoted from them as a starting point to talk about who the true God is. And so I'm all about trying to find common ground with people on where, take their belief system that's true. What's true about your belief system, and now let me show you why in Christianity it finds its ultimate fulfillment. So I think I definitely am more prone to find that common ground than maybe others who think, oh, if I say anything good about the Quran, then it's bad. I'm on the other side of that. If that helps. But that's a great question.
Step forward. Oh. Hello? Hi.
What's up, buddy?
Forward? More? Right there? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for this. I really enjoyed it. What was your near-life experience that brought you to Christ and told you to go to seminary school?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did have a near-life experience. That was Halloween night, 2001. I was attending SMU, and my wife, she's my girlfriend at the time, we were waiting in line for a sorority fraternity party. I told you I was like a partying pagan. And we were waiting in line. It was Halloween night. I was dressed up like Satan, and she was dressed up like a devil girl. And a guy that was shorter than me, that's all I remember about him, he was shorter than me, he was sharing Christ with the girl in front of me. And that was my near-life experience, because I had never seen real evangelism until that night. And he didn't even talk to me. He didn't even talk to Allison. And I don't even remember what he said, really. I remember he said something to the girl about, going in this place, getting drunk and doing all this is not a good example of Christianity. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he was very gentle. He's very respectful. And he walked away. The girl rejected him, and he left. But that moment just floored me. And that's when I think for the first time I felt conviction of sin. And so I overheard, and I've always said it was kind of as if Jesus was saying, "Follow me," from that statement. We went in the club, and my wife, we got in a fight, and we left very quickly after that because I wanted to leave and she didn't. And she came around real soon after that, but we both came to Christ and really grew together. But that was definitely my near life experience. And then the moment that I decided to go to seminary was I remember that specifically too, because I was going to a Campus Crusade for Christ meeting at SMU. It was the first one I ever went to, and the guy speaking was a professor at DTS, Ramesh Richard, and he gave a kind of theological apologetic talk on evil, and I'd never heard like an intellectual talk from a person that actually believed this stuff. And I remember whispering to Allison, I said, wherever he teaches that, that's where I'm gonna go to school. And I found out it was DTS, and I did all that, and so I ended up going to DTS.
Check. All right. Hey, thank you so much for your talk. I really, really appreciated it.
Thanks.
I'm actually a Christian pastor myself, although I thought Deadpool was an amazing movie.
No, you shouldn't have seen Deadpool.
I should have seen it. I should see it again.
I
It
rebuke
was just
you.
a lot of
I
fun.
rebuke you.
Rebuke me all you want. I've had a lot of friends, a lot of close friends that I've made recently from the atheist community, and if they were, I encouraged them to come tonight. They didn't, and I think one of the things that they would have jumped on, and I'm a little troubled by it as well, but you seem to, there's like this really, really muddy distinction between, like with the jihadi woman, it's like, wow, she's really, really, really right until she's wrong. Or the convenience store guy is like, wow, that's a really, really great near-life experience. It's really, really great until it's wrong. And I really resonate with this whole idea that people are feeling this great sense of apathy and the man-child piece. I mean, 100% right on. But if what that's leading us to is a life where we're looking for we're looking for something that we're willing to die for, we're looking for this opportunity to put on scars, I agree with every bit of that. But what I see just in the context, right, is a lot of people who are like, you know what, I'm willing to die for this so much, I'm willing to kill for it. I believe this so fervently that I'm willing to accept scars for it, but I'm also willing to inflict them.
Yeah.
And I think that it's kind of, I love what you said, but it's kind of unacceptable to say, yeah, but there's this kind of line, and after we go beyond that line, it's just kind of not okay. And I think that as leaders and as apologists, we've got to be able to say, here's the line, dude, and we got to be crystal clear on when we have crossed the line from being zealous to being an extremist. And, we can point our fingers at the Islamists and at all sorts of things, but Christians are just as guilty of this, and it's scandalous. And we have got to find a way to be just crystal clear on where that line is. And that's, I think that, we love the passion and we love the excitement, we love the zealousness, that near-life moment, it's great, but we got to know if all that stuff finds its perfection in the gospel, then what is that limiting thing that keeps that kind of extremism out of the fullest expression of the faith?
Very good point. Yeah, I think I think the line needs to be very clear. One thing I like about this movie and Fight Club is talking about inflicting pain. He says, he says to the narrator, I want you to hit me as hard as you can. So the message of, at least in this movie, the message of the fighting, really it's not about fighting, there's a whole metaphor there, but we won't get into that. But just the whole idea, though, that you hit me, I'll take your pain, I'll take the burden. And I really like that it's not I inflict pain on you, it's you inflict pain on me. But again, all the analogies fall. The message of the gospel, the Sermon on the Mount, is to turn the other cheek, and that is the harder thing to do. And so you find a kind of a parallel with that, with Tyler saying, I want you to hit me, I'm not going to hit you. But the nonviolence of the gospel is absolute, clear, black and white, and that needs to be very clear. Never, if I gave any impression, I think that violence should be ever be inflicted, that's where the metaphor ends, for sure. Good question.
So what would you, in terms of culture reflecting art, art reflecting culture, how would you delve into that discussion or enter in that discussion in an environment that does look at something like Deadpool as art?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is a gray area, and so like I said, if I find great redemption value in Fight Club, and if somebody says that they find great redemption value in Deadpool, who am I to say that they're wrong? But I don't see it. But it's a gray area. It's a gray area with this, and so I do think there are some things clearly black and white. There's some things that are very black and white, that are unredeemable. But I think as Christians, we should be seeking to redeem wherever we can. I do see that with Paul. I do see him in Acts 17 with Athens, seeking to find ways to find common ground. And so I think we need to be able to find common ground in every way we can. And again, it's each to his own conscience. You know, if my conscience is seared by watching a certain movie, it may not sear somebody else who watches that movie. So I think that's where the gray area is. But I think I'm definitely for the seeking to redeem wherever we can. But if someone wants to redeem something like 50 Shades of Grey or Wolf of Wall Street, I want to hear that redemption. Please explain to me that redemption. Give a talk like what I just gave. So there's certain things that I think probably don't pass the redemption line, but again, that's a subjective thing.
Two things. I've never seen Fight Club, so if you could
need to see it.
If you could run down the movie, because like you didn't tell us what it was about, so I don't know what his premise was, what was he doing. And the second thing was the guy with the gun on his head. You said that what did he wish he had done? Is it okay if you, or what do you think as a Christian, if there's nothing you wish you had done, if you're content with where you are, should we want to have something we've done before we die, or is it okay to not, like, to think that what you've done is enough?
That's excellent. Yeah, I think if you may be where Paul was, as he says in Philippians 4, I have found the secret to contentment. And so definitely there is a possibility that somebody is in a place like Paul where he looks back and he is content, post coming to Christ, he is content with where he's at and he's just moving forward. So I think that the challenge of the movie would still be, this is your life and it's ending 1 minute at a time. So to continue to live the life of contentment, to live the life of serving Christ to the best of your ability. But if you look back and you have no regret, then that just doesn't apply to I think that wouldn't apply to Paul. So I think that's definitely right. As far as the premise of the movie, I think I recommend, well, I don't want to recommend seeing it. Yeah, you're not supposed to talk about Fight Club. But it like I said, it's a guy that it begins with him having a midlife crisis. It's like what I said, he's been emasculated by this culture. He is not content with what's going on, and he basically creates an alter ego kind of thing, Tyler. And Tyler is the one who kind of rescues him. But in the end, he has to kill off even Tyler to be free. So the movie, again, it really ends up having a nihilistic type of, ends, and that's why I said that's not like the gospel. But the method that Tyler uses to raise up his army is where I find inspiration and kind of what we should be doing as Christians. Project Mayhem is what I think the church has Fight Club. So if you use Fight Club as a metaphor of a place where people gather for accountability, to bear each other's burdens, that's excellent. But what the church, I think, it misses and needs in America more than anything is Project Mayhem. Project Mayhem is going outside and to really engage the culture. And so the church needs to do things like you had this Harvest America tonight with Greg Laurie, if you heard about it, which is a great thing. Hundreds of thousands of people come together at the stadium and they all pray and as Christians. But where's the thing where we actually go into an area full of strip clubs or full of poverty or full of some, horrific situation and have hundreds of thousands of Christians, middle class to upper class Christians, and go in there and pray for people and help them and do something? I want to see that kind of thing rather than just conferences that we pay and go to. I think that the Project Mayhem, the getting into the culture and getting in the mix of it, and spending time with the tax collectors and the prostitutes and that type of thing, I think that is what we're missing. And I see that inspiration in that Project Mayhem type imagery. In fact, at our church, I had we're serious about cultural engagement. I don't use the term really anymore, but on our website it's still there. But I called it Project Incarnation, and I got it from Fight Club. So.
Okay, so I'm back again. So I'm gonna follow up to my question before, but dude, that's such a the nonviolence thing it's like a very easy softball kind of line, because there's a lot of things that don't quite meet that standard that I personally find really kind of reprehensible when I look at the sort of what people would identify as distinctively Christian practice in building the kingdom. And You know, we see Christians routinely engage in bullying, which is nonviolent. I mean, if it's certainly of the verbal variety. There's a lot of evangelicals who are very excited about the Donald Trump presidency, which I'm not asking you to defend, but
And I won't.
There's no. Thank you. Good. So you're no on Deadpool and no on Donald Trump, and we at least know there's okay. There's a line somewhere. All right. But
you're for Deadpool, but you're not for Donald Trump. So.
I think Deadpool's a lot of fun. But anyway, back to point. But it's like I think that there's a lot of Christians who get really, really fuzzy on, you know, and I think even just the whole premise of Fight Club, the gospel according to Fight Club, is it kind of contributes to kind of muddying the waters that we want to go out there and engage the culture. And part of the reason this is really important to me is like we've had some people in our community from the atheist community who were concerned about people in leadership exercising undue influence from a Christian perspective on the student body. And I was like, you know what, I'm a Christian person, but I don't want the principal teaching my kids the faith. That's my job. I got that. And so we really got to the point where we were advocating for atheist members of the community, really wanting to stand by them and showing intentional compassion and solidarity with people that we didn't agree with. And man, the Christians hated that. Could not stand it. And in my mind, it was like, this is a really, really good example of what it means to be, you know, going out and having that near-life experience, taking on those scars, taking on, you know, we lost friends over it. And I'm like, great, that sounds perfect. I'm kind of glad we did all that. But I guess rather than kind of trying to clarify that line, which, you know, we'll pick and poke at each other all night, but how do we as Christian leaders encourage people to go out and do the right kind of fighting, which isn't the kind of fighting that just demeans and bullies and beats people up, but instead really shows honest compassion and love and forgiveness and solidarity with people, not because they agree with us, but because they're people that are in a position to really feel what the love of Christ looks like. And realizing that, man, that's not a fun or flashy or glamorous thing to do.
That's good. I would give, I think, a great example for us would be Paul here, because it's one of the reasons why I like the fighting imagery. Paul consistently uses imagery of fighting, of Roman Empire, weapons. We use weapons of warfare, but it's not the weapons of this world. And our war is not against flesh and blood. And so when I look at Paul, he would go, he really pictured what he was doing when he would go and plant a church, when he would proclaim the gospel, as kind of going to war. He pictured himself fighting spiritual principalities and demonic forces behind the scenes, but he would do so with tears. He would do so with love. He would do so with just the Christ-like humility. And so I think Paul is a good example of someone who thinks of himself in a metaphorical way, like a William Wallace going to war with the culture. But when you look at him and you watch what he's doing, he looks like Christ. He looks like a Gandhi in a way. He's going and he's loving and he's sacrificing and he's taking the punches and he's taking the scars. And so I definitely am all for that. And I get inspiration from Paul on that for sure. It's great. Great question.
As we talked about before everything started, I firmly believe there's tons of theology to be found in Fight Club. I'm really curious, what's something that you wanted to talk about but you ended up having to cut out?
To think about that one. What's something I wanted to talk about but I had to cut? I did have to cut a lot. Let me think about that. Yeah, I think I didn't want to sound. The movie really emphasizes the lack of fathers, so I think that's a big one. The absentee fathers, and so the character in the movie talks about how his father abandoned when he was young, and that affected the way he looked at God as father. Because if his father abandoned him, then what about God? What does that say about God? And so I think we have, and he argues that we've had about 2 or 3 generations of men that, in majority, not all, maybe not even majority, but in a large dominant portion, have been raised only by women, which women did the best they could, but men needed a man in the house to model that and to be an example. And so I think the movie emphasizes that. I was pushing more what the movie was saying about emasculating of the culture. and just living in a place where everything's safe and secure, and you don't have to fight, you don't have to do anything, like men had to do with more chivalrous situations. But I think the fatherless nature is something to really explore, and the challenge for all of us, if any of us are fathers and are going to be fathers, for us to not be that absentee father and to actually engage and to take care and raise our kids in the way that they should go. I think that's a big emphasis that this movie could really take.
This question is actually from Micah. Other than his favorite movie, God's Not Dead, 2, 1 and 2.
Is 2 even out yet? No. Okay.
Yeah. Where else have you seen some of these principles displayed in movies and in theater? And then secondly, more important, how do I get a photocopy of you in the devil suit?
What was the first one, though? I missed the first one.
Where do you see in other cinema this recurring theme of wake up, rise up, do something, where you see a correlation like in Fight Club? And then need a picture of the devil suit. That was the more important one.
There is a picture of us. We got to find that, Allison. We got to find that, babe.
I see a pending BBC T-shirt.
There is a picture somewhere. I've seen it, but my parents took a picture of us as we went out that Halloween night. But I don't know where that picture is. We got to find it. I'd first say what we were talking about before, that all great any movie that's great has some element of the gospel in it, so has some theme of redemption in it. And so we see that theme in all the movies. I'm trying to think of a movie that challenges me to live the way Fight Club does. I'd say Braveheart's probably the closest one. You know, William Wallace's great speech in that one scene where he basically says, you know, you could fight, you can leave now and die on your beds as old men, but you'll always regret this one chance you could have fought for freedom. And so I think that has a good parallel to the Fight Club, but I'd have to think about it more. I'd probably come up with many examples.
Any books you can recommend on cultural apologetic studies?
Fight Club's not that great a book. You got to watch the movie. The movie's better, much better. No, the book's okay. He's a homicidal maniac. You talking about the line? He's a homicidal maniac in the book. He at least doesn't want to kill people in the movie. That was a great line. Yeah, books on this, I want to explore more because, you know, just my own passion for movies. I've been doing this on my own. I haven't really read any books that engage. I think Tim Keller's the best that I've found that engages the culture and does a good job within his books, but I don't think there's been an actual book that I know of written like this. So, but Tim Keller does an excellent job bringing out Lord of the Rings and a lot of things in his books.
So I haven't watched the movie, but I watched a YouTube clip, and he challenged people to go out and fight a stranger. So what is your biblical interpretation of him telling them to go out and fight strangers?
Well, actually, just to correct you on that a little bit, it goes back to what I was saying before. His homework assignment, the first homework assignment of Tyler, remember all analogies failed, but his homework assignment there was to go pick a fight and to lose. So it was actually to go and fight and just try to get somebody to engage them in a fight and to lose. But the message was to get those to basically give those people a near-life experience. So the purpose of it was to give those people a near-life experience, because the whole premise is these people are enslaved by these jobs and the different things they do, and they've never been in a fight since maybe kindergarten or something. And so they need to do something that gives them life. And so the metaphor here is the fight. And so it's you engage them in a fight, but you lose. And so I think it goes back to that taking a punch. But but again, go through scene after scene. I'm not going to defend everything in Fight Club, that's for sure.
I guess since we're asking more than one question, I'm not sure what your name is. Doug, but after he asked that one question, I kind of felt compelled to ask my question, because since his atheist friends didn't show up, I'm an atheist. And
We usually have a pretty good atheist audience in our BBC.
I don't know if there are any other ones here, but at any rate, I guess my question would...
Oh, they're at the Greg Laurie event. That's right. They're at Harvest America. That's right.
So I'm not the type of guy that like to jump on somebody, but I guess if you could explain to the atheist, when you're using the movie Fight Club and these analogies, and somebody talked about the line, where does that stop? How does the Christian explain to the atheist when Jesus talks about, I don't bring peace, I bring a sword? And then you look at Jesus being the Son of the Father and being the same essence, whatever word you want to use, right, that they talked about a long time ago. But God has a history of telling his people to kill others. And Christians have done that even after Christ. So how does the Christian explain to the non-believer who is opposed to anything to do with this type of God why there is a line, especially when you're talking about Fight Club and you're using it as a reference, why is that line there? Because it doesn't seem to be there with this God.
Yeah, it's a great question. The quote from Jesus, he says, I did not come to bring peace but a sword. I've always found that one interesting when people use that to try to say Jesus is violent, because if you read the context, it's actually about the divisions that's going to be caused in family. So the sword there is a metaphor. I mean, read every commentator on that passage and you'll find that it's a metaphor for division. And what I found is, even with my atheist friends, they talk about how when they come out as atheists to their family, what happens many times? There's division. There's division, and they say that needs to happen because you need to be honest about yourself, and you need to be open, and you need to say what you believe. And if there's going to be division, if your parents are going to disown you or whatever happens, there's going to be division. Well, that's exactly what Jesus is saying. He's saying, when I come into a household, if two people believe in me, there's going to be division. And so that's what he means by, I didn't come to bring peace but a sword, because when people believe in me in a household, there's going to be division and there's going to be hostility, because the people who don't believe in me and the people who believe in me are going to divide. Now, ideally, it should be the person that's the unbeliever in that case. The believer should be the one loving the unbeliever. So I think in the context of what Jesus is saying, that's what it is. But again, that is one exception that you could take if you, I think that's the correct way to understand it. But if you took that and you compare it to all the other statements of Jesus that are completely nonviolent, turn the other cheek, love your enemy, being nailed to a cross and saying, forgive them, they know not what they do. So when people do things violent in the name of Christianity, they're clearly contradicting their Lord. I mean, in fact, anyone who's ever done violence in the name of Christianity, I don't think they've ever used that text, that I've come to not bring peace but a sword. But for example, with Islam, in contrast, if you do violence in Islam, you can justify it by not only the Quran, but you can justify it by the example of Muhammad. Because Muhammad himself took up a sword and actually fought. That's not debated among Muslims. That's not a negative slight against Muslims. He really did. Even if he did it in a righteous way, even if he did it in a just way, he still took up a sword and fought. Jesus never did. Jesus let the sword fall on him. So I think the nonviolence in the example of Jesus and his earliest disciples shows that anybody who does things in a violent way in the name of Christ is completely contradicting what Jesus taught. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Now, I appreciate the pacifism of Jesus. I really do. But however, I don't think it's quite that easy, because his apostles were armed. In the Gethsemane, Peter cut off the ear. Jesus' rebuke really wasn't, you shouldn't do that. This isn't the time, is my impression.
Really? Well, let's think about what Jesus said, though. Jesus said, put away your sword, for all who fight with the sword will die by the sword, right? And so I think Jesus is clearly saying not to use it. Now, yeah, why did he have a sword? That you get the impression that you have one text where Jesus says, if you have swords, take them. And there's a lot of debate on exactly what he means by that. It's probably self-defense, because in contrast, Jesus had sent them out earlier and said, don't take anything, only take one of everything, so you rely on everybody else, and the Lord's going to protect you. But the idea is that once Jesus is going to die and rise again and go away, now you can have a sword for self-defense, maybe. That's my interpretation of it. But again, there's many different interpretations of that. But whenever they did use the sword, what's definitive is whenever they did actually use the sword in violence, Jesus said, "Don't do that." I mean, he outright told Peter not to do that. So I think even with that text, you can't get a Jesus that's supporting violence in any way from his believers. Now, I'll separate the government. Jesus definitely, he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And just like Paul says, the government has the sword to inflict vengeance on those who do wrong and to reward those who do right. So when we're talking about the government, that's separate from the church.
Sure, go ahead. That's right. I'm having a private moment.
Separation of church and state, man.
I don't even know where to go with that.
Okay.
That felt like that's a whole separate conversation. That's
Okay.
Last question. How can we pray for you and your work at 1042 and DTS?
Yeah, I told we have a lot of people. One thing I've been telling our church is we have Easter coming up, and no timetables for God, of course, but just been praying for a lot of people in our church that are connected to our church, that have been coming to our church, that are not followers of Christ. And so we've just really been praying for them to come to Christ, to be baptized, and to see them grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So that's been a great prayer for us, and I've been challenging our church to pray for those around them that they know that aren't followers of Christ yet. So I'd say that's the biggest thing right now that's on my heart.
Thank you. Dr. Justin Bass.